What makes an ordinary person steal a plane with no passengers, perform a barrel roll over the bay, and steer the machine into a forest? The whole country looked for the answer to this question and never found it. On the afternoon of August 10, 2018, a 29-year-old man walked through the service area of Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Nothing special, an employee going to his shift. He passed the checkpoint intended exclusively for staff, swiped his badge. The turnstile clicked. Cameras captured his face calm, unremarkable. The security guard at the desk didn't even look up from the monitor. This man's name was Richard Russell, a ground service employee for Horizon Air, a model husband, a calm and responsible worker. For 4 years, he had been towing aircraft and loading passenger luggage. Among his colleagues, Richard was known as a quiet, modest guy. He was valued and respected. No one had ever heard him raise his voice. No one had seen him in conflict with anyone. He was one of those people you only notice when they're not around. But 5 hours later, in the heat of his shift, this man would commit an act that would shock the whole country. What happened next would change his fate forever and force a review of security protocols at airports across America. Although by that moment, for Richard himself, it would no longer matter. Richard Russell, fondly called Bebo as a child, was born in Florida. However, he spent most of his youth in Alaska, where the family moved when the boy was still very small. A cold state, long winters when it gets dark at 3 in the afternoon and dawn comes closer to noon. A tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone, where news travels faster than you can walk to the mailbox. In school, he didn't stand out in any special way. He attended an ordinary secondary school, not an A student, not a failure somewhere in the middle, the kind whom teachers struggled to remember while flipping through old journals. But in high school, he became interested in sports. He wrestled, learned to endure pain and not show weakness. He threw the discus monotonous training, the same throw time after time, until the body remembers the movement better than the head. And at some point, he became a star of the school's American football team, a true natural athlete, the kind who can take a hit and isn't afraid of honest competition, one of those respected in the locker room. When he stepped onto the field, the stands knew his name. Classmates' parents patted him on the shoulder in the parking lot after games. In a small town, that means a lot. At his graduation, Richard gave a speech. He stood before a hall full of classmates and their parents in a suit that was probably a little too big for him. And he talked about sports, about what it means to play fair. He said, "Someone who participates in competitions and follows the rules while doing so is already a winner. It doesn't matter what the score on the scoreboard is. What matters is how you behaved on the way to it." The hall applauded. Teachers nodded. His mother wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. Throughout his school years, he never broke a single rule, not one. No lateness, no notes from parents about a made-up illness, no cheating on tests. People would remember this again and again later when they tried to understand what happened, when they looked for cracks in the flawless facade. After graduating school in 2008, serious prospects opened up for the young man. North Dakota State University invited him to the American football team. For a guy from a small town in Alaska, it was a big deal, a chance, a ticket to another life, an opportunity to become something more than the neighbor's son who runs well with a ball. But unfortunately, he failed to repeat his school successes at the university level. The competition turned out to be tougher. Here everyone had been stars of their schools, the training exhausting. 6 in the morning, the gym, weights, the field again. Or maybe something inside was just missing. That fire that distinguishes good athletes from great ones. In his second year, Richard dropped out. Quietly, without a scandal, without explanation. He just packed his things, put them in the car, and left. He called his parents only once he was on the road. Wanting to start all over again, he moved to Oregon and enrolled in a local community college. A new state, new people, a clean slate. No one here knew he had been a football star. No one asked why he dropped out of university. He could reinvent himself. Raised in a religious environment since childhood, here he immersed himself even deeper in faith. He joined a student Christian organization, Campus Crusade for Christ. Evening meetings, joint prayers, conversations about meaning and purpose, and he voluntarily took on the role of a mentor for high schoolers. He liked helping. He liked feeling needed, that his words meant something to someone. At one of the meetings, an ordinary evening, plastic chairs in a circle, coffee from a machine in paper cups, the smell of cheap cookies, he met a girl named Hannah. She was sitting opposite him, and when their eyes met, she smiled. Just like that, for no reason. Something clicked between them immediately. He approached her after the meeting. They talked until the building closed. Then another hour in the parking lot until they froze. A couple of years later, in 2012, they got married. A small wedding, only close ones. Happy faces in the photos. The white dress she sewed herself. The rings he saved for half a year. Shortly after the wedding, the newlyweds opened their own bakery, Hannah's Artisan Bread and Pastry. Her name on the sign, that was his idea. The smell of fresh dough in the morning when the sun is just rising. Flour on the floor, heat from the ovens. Regular customers who stopped by not just for rolls, but to chat. Old ladies who remembered him by name. Business went well. They didn't get rich, but it was enough to live on. It seemed life had finally lined up. It seemed he had found his place. But his wife began to yearn for home. Oregon was foreign, too much rain, too few familiar faces. Relatives were far away, thousands of kilometers. She spoke more and more often about missing her family, her mother, her sisters, Sunday dinners where there wasn't enough room at the table. The couple thought about moving. They discussed it for a long time, weighing the pros and cons, mapping out pluses and minuses on paper. In the end, in the fall of 2014, they sold the business. They locked the bakery door for the last time and left the key for the new owners. And in early 2015, they moved to Washington State, closer to her relatives. That was when Richard Russell got a job as a ground handling agent at Horizon Air. Work was found quickly. The company was hiring. Turnover was high. He was glad, then glad. A stable salary, medical insurance, a schedule that could be planned. The work turned out to be far from easy. His duties included towing planes before departure and after landing, performing de-icing of the aircraft and loading passenger luggage. Heavy bags, suitcases packed to the brim with bulging zippers, strollers, skis in bulky covers, golf clubs. All this had to be hauled by hand in any weather. In the heat, when the concrete gets so hot the air above it shimmers. In the cold, when fingers go numb even in gloves. In the rain, when the uniform gets soaked through in the first 10 minutes of the shift. In 2017, Richard wrote in his blog that he used to feel sorry for such workers himself. He wrote honestly, without embellishment. Just as he thought, I never thought I'd end up in this place. Previously, when traveling, I looked out the window and saw these sullen people. They moved slowly around the apron, or fussily threw bags into carts. No smiles, no talking. Like robots, it seemed like the most pathetic job in the world. Why would anyone voluntarily subject themselves to constant noise, exhaust fumes, carrying other people's things all day? I didn't understand. I thought this would never happen to me. And now, he was one of them. One of those sullen people on the apron. And surely someone was looking at him from a window and thinking the same thing. But this position had one important advantage-free flight for employees. Now Richard could visit his relatives in Alaska at any time, get on a plane after a shift, fly home, hug his parents, sit in the kitchen, which smelled the same as in childhood. This was valuable. This kept him afloat. It reminded him that outside the airport, there was another life. In that same year, 2017, he graduated with honors from Washington State University. He received a bachelor's degree in social sciences by correspondence alongside work, lectures at night, exams on weekends, the diploma in a frame on the living room wall, proof that he was not just a loader, that he had potential, that this work was temporary, a step, not the final point. He told his wife about his plans, many plans. They discussed them in the evenings when he came home from his shift, smelling of kerosene and sweat. Join the military. They value discipline there, and he knows how to follow rules. Or get a job in law enforcement. He always believed in justice. Or why not grow into a management position at his airline? Become the one who makes the schedules, who sits in the office, who no longer carries suitcases. Hannah listened and nodded, believed in him, or pretended to believe. In December 2017, Richard posted a humorous video on his amateur YouTube channel. A few hundred subscribers, friends, relatives, random people who forgot to unsubscribe. In the frame himself and his monotonous work, grey sky, concrete, planes looking like one another, endless suitcases. Behind a series of uniform scenes, his voice sounds, "Hi, I'm Bebo Russell. I'm a ground service agent. That means I carry a lot of bags, an incredible amount of bags." He said this with irony, with a smile in his voice, but something else was hidden behind the irony, fatigue perhaps, or disappointment. Later in the video, a selfie flashes. He's under pouring rain, hood pulled over his eyes, drops running down his face, then footage of a storm flooding the runway. Water stands in puddles ankle deep. The wind bends the trees behind the fence. The planes stand as if tied down. No one flies in such weather. Usually, I have to work in such conditions. Outside, Richard adds, it was like a complaint, but a complaint wrapped in a joke, so that no one would take it seriously, so that he could say, "Oh, I'm just kidding," if someone asked. On the whole, Richard Bebo Russell gave the impression of a calm, balanced person. Colleagues respected him. Friends loved him. An avid traveler, thanks to the free flights, he visited dozens of places. Social media photos, mountains, beaches, unfamiliar cities. A former athlete, still in good shape, still able to run a mile without shortness of breath. A former bakery owner, a leader of the local Christian community, a person with a diploma and plans for the future. No one, not a single person, expected anything sudden or extraordinary from him. Nothing even remotely similar to what would happen next. When they later interviewed his acquaintances, everyone would say the same thing. "I can't believe it. Not him. This is some kind of mistake. Friday, August 10th, 2018. Seattle Tacoma International Airport, USA. Summer is in full swing. The temperature is a comfortable low 20s, a light breeze from the bay, an ordinary working day, one of hundreds, no different from yesterday. Unremarkable. Life at the airport goes on as usual. A passenger rushes to the check-in desk, dragging a suitcase on wheels late for a flight, looking nervously at their watch. Someone slowly sips coffee by the panoramic window, looking at the airfield. 3 hours until departure. No need to hurry. Children press their noses to the glass, watching the planes take off. "Mom, look, a big one." Announcements over the PA system, a monotonous female voice that no one has listened to for a long time. Noise, movement, routine, the smell of coffee, perfume, and disinfectant. An airport is a well-coordinated mechanism. Hundreds of people performing their tasks. Everyone knows their role. Everyone does their job. Pilots check instruments. Flight attendants smile at passengers. Loaders carry baggage. Dispatchers look at screens. And it all works day after day, year after year, without failures, almost without failures. At 1:35 p.m. local time, a Horizon Air Q400 aircraft lands, arriving from Victoria, Canada. A short flight, less than an hour in the air, just a hop across the border. The Q400 is a Canadian twin-engine turboprop airliner, a workhorse of regional routes, a reliable machine proven by thousands of flights. This specific aircraft performed flights under the Alaska Airlines brand, white and blue livery, an Eskimo on the tail. The flight from Victoria was to be the plane's last for today. A schedule is a schedule. Passengers got off, collected their luggage, and went about their business. The crew filled out paperwork and went to rest. After that, the plane was towed to a remote parking area, Terminal C's cargo area, away from passenger gates, away from the hustle and bustle. There, it was supposed to stand until morning, empty, quiet, not needed by anyone until the next flight. About an hour after landing, around 2:30 in the afternoon, Richard Russell enters the airport building. An ordinary shift, an ordinary day, nothing special. He passes through the staff checkpoint, swipes his work badge, a card with his photo, with his name. The turnstile lets him through without questions. Cameras record a calm face, a steady gait, hands in pockets, nothing suspicious, nothing that security would pay attention to. Using his pass, he goes out onto the airfield. Heat. The concrete reflects the sun. The smell of kerosene, he's long used to it, doesn't notice anymore. The roar of engines somewhere in the distance, another flight is taking off. Richard heads for Terminal C, to that very Q400 that arrived from Victoria. He doesn't hurry. He walks as he has walked 1,000 times before. According to the schedule, the aircraft was not supposed to fly out until the next day. The first flight in the morning. Until that moment, almost a day. The plane stood to the side, on the outskirts. The staff didn't pay much attention to it. Why? It's not going anywhere. It's just standing there, one of dozens of planes in the parking lot. Richard waited for a moment when no one was around, looked around, made sure he wasn't seen. Colleagues are busy with their own affairs. Someone is unloading another flight. Someone is drinking water in the shade. Someone is looking at their phone. No one is looking at him. And then he sat at the wheel of the tug attached to the plane. A little yellow machine he had driven hundreds of times. Everything is familiar. Everything is known. Hands themselves know what to do. Started the engine, put it in gear. At 7:27 p.m., already evening, the sun is sinking toward the horizon. Shadows are stretching. He turned the airliner 180 degrees, nose to the runway, slowly, carefully, as if he was just doing his job, as if it were part of the plan. Technical maintenance, a ferry move. Then he unhooked the tug. The click of the hitch. The plane rolled forward by inertia. A few meters, stopped, froze on the concrete. Security camera footage shows what happened next. The quality isn't perfect, grainy image. The angle isn't the best, but enough is visible. A few seconds later, the man jumped out of the tug, ran to the plane, quickly but without fuss, went up the fold-out air stairs, opened the door, climbed inside into the darkness of the cabin, and slammed it shut behind him. A metallic sound that the camera didn't record, but which is easy to imagine. Richard Russell entered the cockpit unhindered and locked himself in from the inside, alone, in an empty plane. For 80 seats, 80 empty chairs with folded trays, lights out in the cabin, silence, and him in the pilot's seat, where he had never sat before. The situation began to take on a frightening character the moment the man started the engines. First one, a low hum, a rising roar, then the second, and the plane seemed to wake up, tremble, come alive. The characteristic sound of turboprop engines. The Q400 was ready for flight. The plane moved along the taxiway, slowly but surely, toward the runway. Horizon Air employees didn't notice this immediately, and when they did, they didn't immediately understand what was happening. Someone pointed a hand. Someone exchanged looks with a colleague. Maybe some unscheduled ferry move. Maybe a mistake in the schedule. Maybe they missed something at the morning briefing. But then it dawned on them. Something is going wrong. This plane should not be moving. Not now. Not without a crew. Not without permission. The dispatcher in the tower saw an unidentified aircraft on the radar. A green dot on the screen that moved where it shouldn't have been moving. A plane that shouldn't have been moving, which didn't request permission, which simply taxied onto the runway and stopped there, as if waiting for something or preparing. The dispatcher tried to make contact. Standard protocol, standard phrases, voice professionally flat, without emotion. Silence, the sound of static in the headphones. He repeated the request, twice, thrice, still the same silence on the air. Only the sound of static, no answer. The dispatcher felt something tighten in his chest. This was wrong. This was very wrong. Then another attempt on the right frequency, and finally, a voice came from the cockpit, young, calm, almost friendly, as if a friend were calling to ask how things were, without fear, without tension. At 7:33 p.m. local time, the plane lifted off the ground, just like that, without a single obstacle, without a chase, without sirens. Richard Russell took the airliner into the air. The wheels left the concrete. The ground began to recede. There wasn't a soul on board besides himself. 80 empty seats behind his back. 80 seat belts that no one was fastening. Over the radio, he introduced himself simply, briefly, without a last name, without a title. Rich. About 40 minutes after takeoff at 8:05 p.m. when it became finally clear that this was not a joke or a mistake or a technical glitch. 2 U.S. Air Force F-15 interceptors took to the sky. War machines, afterburners, the roar of engines heard for miles. They received the order, locate and intercept the stolen aircraft. Act according to circumstances. The interceptors gained altitude in minutes. Military equipment against a civilian airliner, it's like a cheetah against a tortoise. They moved for the intercept and soon found themselves next to the slow-moving turboprop 2 Predators next to an unwieldy prey. They stayed at the sides, didn't fall behind. When the fighters caught up with the Q400, the dispatcher went back on air, voice professionally calm, not a hint of panic, years of training. He suggested Richard land the machine. A military airfield is very close, only 2 kilometers away, a long runway, lighting. They are waiting there. Everything can be resolved there. But the man refused. His voice faltered for the first time in the entire conversation. He said he was afraid. They would catch him, put him in handcuffs, put him on trial, put him in prison for years, for decades. He didn't want this, not how he imagined it, not why he climbed in here. The dispatcher tried to calm him down, gently, patiently, like talking to a child who's afraid of the dark. He explained that they were just looking for a safe place to land, that no one wanted to hurt him, that everything could be resolved, that it wasn't too late yet. Richard was silent, thinking. Only his breathing was heard in the microphone. Then he said, "No," quietly, without explanation. The fighters followed closely behind the passenger airliner. They didn't fall behind by a meter, didn't lose sight for a second in the cockpits, pilots in helmets, hands on control sticks. Both fighters were armed with air-to-air missiles. One launch would be enough to tear the turboprop to shreds. The pilots had clear instructions. If the aircraft headed toward a populated area, they would receive the order to destroy it, without warning, without a second chance. They were also allowed to fire warning flares, bright flashes in the evening sky, trails of smoke, a reminder that this is not a game, a reminder that all this is reality. Throughout the flight, Russell negotiated with the dispatcher. Strange negotiations, not like anything these people had encountered in years of work. Richard's voice sounded now calm, now excited. Now he joked inappropriately, awkwardly. Now he went silent for a long time, as if he didn't understand what he was doing and why, as if one part of him was in ecstasy and the other part was in terror. The dispatcher, a middle-aged man with 20 years of experience, would later say it was the strangest conversation of his life. He had heard panic. He had heard aggression. He had heard the drunk and the high. But he had never heard anything like this. The voice of a person who seemed to be talking to himself, who seemed as if he wasn't quite here anymore. At some point, Richard said casually, as if discussing the weather or weekend plans, "I think I'll try to do a barrel roll. If it works, I'll put the nose down and end it at that." A barrel roll, an aerobatic maneuver in a passenger turboprop that isn't designed for it at all, which wasn't created for such loads, performed by a person who never learned to fly, who had never sat in a pilot's seat until this evening, without reaching the limit of the plane's capabilities. By some miracle, some incredible luck, the man sharply pointed the nose down. The ground rushed to meet him, the water of the bay looking like a dark mirror from above. Seconds stretched out, time slowed down, and then a pull on himself, the control yoke to the chest, and he managed to pull out of the dive, level the machine, continue the flight. The wings trembled from the G-load, the hull creaked, but it held. He was alive. The plane was intact, for now. And then, flying over Puget Sound, the airliner performed something quite incredible. A full barrel roll, a 360-degree rotation around the longitudinal axis, at an altitude of a few meters above the water, so low it seemed the wing would clip the waves at any moment. Sun glints on the surface, the wing cutting the air, the world turning upside down and back again. How he did it, no one understood later. Not the experts who study plane crashes for years, not pilots with 30 years of experience who have seen everything, not the instructors who teach flying on these machines and know their capabilities by heart. The Q400 should not have withstood such a maneuver, but it did, as if the plane itself wanted to fly. Performing such figures in a passenger turboprop, Russell risked crashing at any second into the water, and then they simply wouldn't have found him. Into residential areas on the shore, into houses, into streets, into people, into those who at that moment were having dinner or watching TV or putting children to bed, not suspecting that madness was unfolding over their heads, not suspecting that their lives hung by a thread on the decision of a man they had never seen and would never see. The dispatcher made one last attempt. His voice was still calm. Professionalism takes its toll, but now something else was heard in it. Fatigue, or despair, or the realization of how it would all end. For a moment, it seemed the man would agree, that common sense would prevail, that the self-preservation instinct would wake up. Richard said, "Okay." A pause. 3 seconds. 4. Silence on the air. Hope fragile as glass. And then his voice changed. It became different, lower, muffled. Panic seized him. Or maybe clarity, a terrible, final clarity. The answer shocked everyone listening to the airwaves, the dispatchers, the fighter pilots, everyone who was connected to that frequency. "I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't want to. I was hoping that would be the end of it. You see, I didn't actually plan on landing." He didn't plan on landing. From the very beginning, he hadn't planned to. It was a one-way ticket. He knew it when he got into the plane. He knew it when he started the engines. He knew it when he lifted off the ground. Richard asked as if in passing, as if it didn't matter if he would have enough fuel to get to the Olympic Mountains, mountains to the west, snowy peaks turning pink in the sunset light, beautiful, far away. Maybe he wanted to see them one last time. Maybe he was just thinking out loud. Time passed. Minutes turned into tens of minutes. He panicked more and more. You could hear it in his voice. His breathing quickened. His words got tangled. The sun sank below the horizon. The sky turned orange, then crimson, then dark blue. The first stars appeared in the east, and the fuel in the tanks was running out. The gauge needle moved relentlessly towards zero. The red zone, a blinking indicator. His voice grew increasingly somber. The jokes and bravado of the first minutes had vanished. The excitement of flight was gone. Now, only despair sounded over the airwaves, naked, unfiltered. The voice of a man who realized there was no turning back after flying a little further over the water, over the islands, over the sparse lights on the shore, over the life that continued below without him. He added, "There are a lot of people who care about me. They're going to be disappointed when they hear I did this. I would like to apologize to each and every one of them." A pause, heavy breathing into the microphone, the noise of engines in the background. "I'm just a broken guy." Broken, that's what he said. Broken, not crazy, not evil, not desperate. Broken, like a thing that had been dropped and couldn't be fixed. In his own words, he stole the plane to feel peace and freedom in the sky for at least a moment. Something he lacked on the ground, something he could no longer find anywhere else. Not in work, not in family, not in faith. Only here, only now, only this way. After spending about 70 minutes in the air, more than an hour above the earth, one-on-one with the sky, the clouds, and the darkening horizon, Russell informed the dispatcher. One of the engines was failing. The fuel was gone. One motor already silenced, the second still holding on, but not for long. He was advised to descend over the water, to fly at a low altitude. Maybe he could make it. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was a chance. Those were the last communications. After that, silence. The airwaves went quiet. Only the sound of static. Only waiting. At 8:47 p.m., the sun had almost set. The twilight was thickening over the bay. The lights on the shore seemed distant and unreal. The man steered the plane toward Ketron Island, a tiny scrap of land in Puget Sound, 4 kilometers long, less than a kilometer wide, sparsely populated, a few dozen houses scattered along the slopes, lots of forest spruce, pine, thick undergrowth. Maybe he chose this place specifically, consciously, so as not to hit anyone, so as not to cause harm to those who had nothing to do with it. A final act of care, if one could call it that. Or maybe he just flew as long as he could, as long as the fuel and his will lasted, as long as the plane still obeyed. A few moments later, he dipped the nose of the airliner. Yoke forward. The ground rushed to meet him. The trees grew closer first, a green mass, then individual crowns, then branches, and he plummeted down toward the forest, toward the trees, toward the earth, toward what had been waiting for him from the very beginning. The crew of a passing tugboat was the first to notice the crash. A flash bright orange, visible for miles. A column of smoke above the trees, rising into the evening sky. They called the rescuers, relayed the coordinates, and began to wait. Firefighters and medics reached the island an hour and a half later. Not immediately, the island is small, and getting there is difficult. You have to sail, you have to find a landing spot. They had to push through thick brush, force their way through thickets in the dark, with flashlights, their beams catching branches and roots out of the darkness, with equipment on their shoulders. The ground was uneven and rocky. Their feet slipped on the wet grass. Fire engulfed an area of 1 hectare. The dry summer forest ignited instantly. Trees burned like torches, sparks flying in all directions. The heat could be felt 100 meters away. They only managed to extinguish the fire by the following morning, when it was already light and the scale of the destruction became visible. When the firefighters were finally able to get closer, the airliner was completely destroyed. Debris was scattered across the slope for dozens of meters. Twisted metal that had recently been a plane, charred trees, black skeletons against the grey morning sky, the smell of burning that could be detected a kilometer away. And most terrifying of all, the crash site was very close to residential buildings, a few hundred meters. If the trajectory had been slightly different, if he had turned a little to the left, if the wind had been blowing the other way. But they tried not to think about that. It was too terrifying to think about. The incident hit the headlines across the country. Baggage handler steals plane. 70 minutes of madness over Seattle. He said, "I'm a broken guy. Who is Richard Russell?" The media was saturated with details. Experts gave comments, some in studios, others over the phone. Ordinary people discussed it on social networks. Theories multiplied. Versions contradicted one another. The official cause of the crash was ruled a deliberate descent followed by a collision with the ground. Dry words in an official report. Bureaucratic language hiding a tragedy that cannot be explained by formulas. At that time, it became one of the most serious security breaches in US domestic aviation in years. A man without a pilot's license, without a single hour of flight training, an airport employee with a badge and a yellow vest. He just sat in a plane and flew away. How was that even possible? How did the system allow this? Who was to blame? The public was in shock, because this wasn't committed by a terrorist with a beard and crazed eyes, not a psychopath with a criminal past and a history of violence, but a quiet 29-year-old guy, an airline employee who had spent 4 years hauling suitcases, a good husband who loved his wife, a person everyone liked, a person no one understood. From the communications with the dispatcher, it was clear. Richard understood that this was his last flight. He knew from the very beginning, when he got into the plane, when he started the engines, when he lifted off the ground and watched the airport shrink below. He knew. And he took off anyway. According to the FBI, Richard Russell died of multiple traumatic injuries upon impact with the ground. Instant death, if that is any consolation. He took his own life. He chose this path himself, leaving the country in bewilderment. And one question that no one has ever been able to answer: what could have pushed this man, this ordinary, normal, quiet man, to such a radical step? At work, he was loved. Everyone repeated this. Colleagues, management, casual acquaintances who crossed paths with him in the corridors. He, like many others, complained about the pay and working conditions. $14 an hour less than what is paid in some coffee shops. Heavy physical labor that makes the backache and the shoulders throb. The heat in summer when the uniform sticks to the body. The cold in winter when the fingers won't bend. The rain that pours for weeks. But there was nothing unusual in these complaints. Everyone complained that way, every day, in smoking areas and locker rooms. However, one Horizon Air pilot later remembered a couple of strange episodes, trifles that didn't seem important then. Things he noted in the back of his mind and immediately forgot. And then, when everything happened, he remembered. And they seemed completely different. Once, Russell showed a suspicious interest in the procedure for starting planes. He stood nearby while the pilot went through the pre-flight check. He asked questions, not idle ones, but specific ones. He watched closely. He memorized. The pilot thought, then curious guy. He wants to understand how everything works. Nothing wrong with that. And about a year before the incident, that same pilot caught Richard and another crew member in the cockpit. The aircraft was in for maintenance. The doors were open. They were sitting in the pilot seats, Richard in the left, his colleague in the right, and flicking switches, just because. Out of curiosity. Playing pilots like children. Or maybe not just because. The pilot reprimanded them. They apologized and left. It didn't happen again. Or it did, but no one saw. A key was not required to start the Q400. A plane didn't start like a car, but you had to know the sequence, which buttons to press, which toggle switches to flip, in what order, which lights should come on. Richard apparently knew. He learned. He remembered. An analysis of his internet search history showed the man viewed instructional videos about piloting, YouTube clips. There are thousands of them. Instructions, flight simulator walkthroughs, recordings from the cockpits of real planes. He didn't have a pilot's license, not a single hour of official training, not one instructor, not one training flight. But he was preparing, in his own way, secretly, at home, in the evenings, when his wife thought he was playing video games. The CEO of Horizon Air gave a press conference the day after the crash. He stood before journalists, tired, confused, in a suit that seemed to have become too large for him. He said that Russell's aerial maneuvers were incredible. A barrel roll in a Q400, a few meters above the water, without training, without experience. It's impossible. It doesn't fit in the head. It contradicts everything we know about flight. It is unclear where he got such experience. During the communications, Richard himself admitted to the dispatcher that he knew a little about the controls, thanks to video games. Most likely, he was talking about flight simulators. Microsoft Flight Simulator, X-Plane, programs that replicate flight with frightening accuracy, hours and hours at the computer, virtual flights, virtual takeoffs and landings, virtual crashes after which you can just press restart. He practiced in his room, alone, at night, while the whole house slept, preparing for a flight from which he did not intend to return. And no one noticed anything. Some friends and relatives put forward another version. In high school and college, Richard played American football, a tough contact sport where collisions are part of the game. Hits, tackles, falling onto hard ground, numerous concussions diagnosed and otherwise. The ones after which he rested up and returned to the field, the ones he told no one about. Perhaps his mental instability was caused by chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, a long name for a terrifying thing, a neurological disease that develops after repeated head injuries. It is often found in former football players, those who played in their youth and seemed perfectly healthy, in boxers who fought hundreds of bouts, in hockey players who spent their entire careers hitting the boards. The symptoms, depression that comes for no reason, impulsivity that cannot be controlled, memory lapses, mood swings, and fatal thoughts, quiet voices in the head saying that everything is meaningless. This version was impossible to either confirm or deny. CTE is only diagnosed post-mortem. One must examine the brain under a microscope. And too little was left of Richard. Charred remains, scattered debris, nothing that could be put under a microscope. Ultimately, no one ever found out what was going on in his head. What broke when it broke? Was it one moment, a click after which everything changed, or a slow slide downward, day by day, month by month? And whether it could have been fixed, whether it could have been noticed, whether it could have been stopped. Only the recordings of the communications remained, audio files that were later posted on the internet. The voice of a young man in the dispatcher's headphones. Calm at the beginning, almost cheerful, almost carefree, desperate at the end, quiet, broken, no longer quite alive. "I'm just a broken guy." Those words were later quoted again and again in articles, in documentaries, in podcasts that analyzed the story minute by minute. They became an epitaph for a man who once stood before a room of graduates and said that a winner is the one who plays by the rules, who believed in it, who lived by that principle. And then he broke all the rules at once, in one evening, in one flight, over the bay where the sun was setting behind the mountains. And no one ever understood why.